There are things that people can do. So thank you, Elaine.
So we're talking here.
Yeah. Do you want this lowering down a little bit? Let's just put back and forward. Is that about? Just try that if you want to step closer.
Okay. Hope. Robert's spoken a lot about hope. Last week I was in Great Western Hospital in Swindon. A friend of mine is in there at the moment, and if anybody follows me on Facebook, you'll see that I'm a bit of a health warrior, and I will not take no for an answer. Whatever anybody says to me, I will always challenge if I don't agree with it. And yes, I am opinionated, but it's also saved my life. Last July I was given a year to live, and by end of October, just before end of October, I had stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and was told if I didn't have chemo, I would be very poorly by Christmas and I would be dead within a year. So within 4 months I'd cracked it, and I'll tell you how I did that shortly. But going back to the hope thing, my friend was in a coma in Swindon Hospital. His wife contacted me to say, we need your help again because the doctors aren't listening. They'd taken his feeding tube out and declared that he was on the way out, absolutely no hope, and he was going to die. And this conversation was held in front of him, and I'm sure you've all read and heard that people in comas can know what's going on. So the doctors and nurses are there talking over him across the bed. He's dying, the feed tube was out, they're going to leave him to go. And we said, I don't think so. So anyway, long story short, there's now a plan in place. He's gradually waking up, he's responding to her, he's trying to talk, and hopefully within the next 48 hours he'll be at home. So never, ever, ever say never. You know, there's always hope. My own situation, I've had cancer 3 times. I started in March 2009 with breast cancer. I had a mastectomy and reconstruction. 2 years later, or 18 months later, intuitively I felt something wasn't quite right, and there was no lumps, no symptoms, no pain, no nothing. And the people at, where was I under there, Oxford, they humoured me. We went through various different tests and analysis and so on, and found I had a grade 3 tumour within the site of my mastectomy. So how the hell does that happen? My right breast used to be my stomach, which is the title of a book that I published on Kindle if anybody's interested. So my right breast used to be my stomach, so how can I get a grade 3 tumour within the site there? It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, I did. So that was removed, and then I kept on getting lumps and bumps, and my body is like a jigsaw puzzle of scars and wounds where I've had various different biopsies. Because every lump that appeared, obviously we needed to find out what was what. And then last July I was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's, and I'm sure that all these lumps and bumps was the Hodgkin's sort of saying, hello, I'm here, we need some attention. But because the biopsies were so small, they couldn't ascertain the cause, so they kept on saying that it was, what did they call it? There's a phrase that they use, inconclusive. So I kept on celebrating, thinking inconclusive means no cancer, but actually I was wrong. So in the meantime, I've studied nutrition. For the last, since 2009, I've been giving some guidance, signposting. As Robert says, we have to be careful. This stupid Cancer Act, you're not allowed to say, you can't cure cancer. But here we are, walking, talking. But we've done it ourselves. So I don't say I give advice. I give signposting and hope and inspiration to others that we can get through it ourselves. But the most important thing is to take charge of your own body, and not be brainwashed by the white coats. They're great in an emergency. I have the utmost respect for the doctors and the emergency teams when you need an emergency. Cancer is not necessarily an emergency. Don't get it in the first place. If you do get it, it's manageable and it's reversible, providing it's caught in time and you adopt the right mindset. Mindset is really, really important. To give you an example, some of the walk-ins at National Health Service, the 25% 75% of people that walk into accident and emergency with severe stomach problems, most of it is self-induced, and there's studies out there that prove that. Don't just take my word for it. Because people worry themselves, literally worry themselves to death. How often have you heard doctors say you've got 2 months, 6 months, a year, and then right on time, 2 months, 6 months, a year, people die to order. So, they're trained to give you drugs because that's their training, that's their background, and drugs do work, they can work. I've had my share of all sorts over the years, of different drugs and all kinds of things. I wouldn't touch them with a barge pole now, absolutely not. But I now know what I know. I didn't know, then, and that's the important thing, to learn and educate yourself as you're going along. I get contacted every day of the week now by people who say they want to hear about what I did and how I did it. So I've produced some leaflets that I can send out to people if anybody's interested. So my cancer journey has actually started years and years and years ago. Cancer doesn't suddenly happen overnight. Usually it's a chemical, a physical or an emotional shock to our systems. Grief brings on cancer. A friend of mine, in fact the lady whose husband I just spoke about, who was in a coma, her mother died of breast cancer. No, tell her lies, she had breast cancer. I think she died of something else. Anyway, she went to visit her mother, and there were 5 women in the ward with breast cancer, and they'd all been bereaved within the last 12 months, the previous 12 months. And the doctors just weren't, connecting the two. Your emotions are really, really so important to keep in check, but also to express. So what if you cry, you get angry, upset, happy, love, whatever the emotion is at the time, you need to let that emotion out. And that's something that I've never done, but I've learned to my cost how to do that now. So there's lots of different relaxation strategies. Stress is huge, absolutely huge, and we all live with stress on a day-to-day basis. So look at your lives, look at how you are stressed. Is it physical, emotional, psychological? What sort of stress are you under? Is it work stress? Is it personal stress? Once you know what you're dealing with, then you can unravel it and start to deal with it. Stress, long-term antibiotics is another one that's really makes you vulnerable to cancer. When I was a teenager, I was a competitive swimmer, and I would train 2-3 times a day in the swimming pool full of chlorine, another toxic thing that we don't want anywhere near us. So during my training days, I often used to get waterwork infections, and on occasions when I was really bad, I would just projectile vomit, like babies do with the reflux thing. And it turned out they kept on saying that it's the chlorine in the water, it's affecting my kidneys and my bladder, and all the infections I was getting was just one of those things. So my mum changed the washing powder to biological, a non-biological. Again, now I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. I use those eco-egg things. I use the mineral stuff. I don't use any washing powder. So I was finally diagnosed. I was blue lighted to an isolation ward when I was 21, I think I was 21. And they thought I had typhoid. And it was the most awful time, but anyway, I came out. They still didn't properly know what was wrong, but eventually they found out it was a congenital kidney disease, a rare condition, and I've only ever met one person with that condition. It's called medullary sponge kidneys, and it's where the bottom tubes of the kidneys don't pump out properly, so you have all this silt and muck building up, and then it gets to a point, and the only way out is either waterwork infection or bringing it up. So I was put on antibiotics, a 3-week rotating cycle, so I'd take one for a week, then another for a week, and then the third week, and then I'd go back to week 1. So this went on for 23 years.
Oh my God.
I was told I'd be on them for life, and luckily when I was 44, 15 years ago, I was introduced to a chiropractor and to a nutritionist. And the chiropractor worked on my back. I've often had used to have back problems, and the area of my spine that supports my bladder and my kidneys was the weakest area. So he did a lot of work on my spine, and his partner, who's a nutritionist, she taught me about eating properly and lifestyle changes and that sort of thing. And I changed entirely, you know, how I was living and lifestyle and that sort of thing, and particularly food. So that was fine. I think it was about a year or so later I decided that enough is enough. I'm going to wean myself off the antibiotics that I was told I'd be on for life. Gradually came off, had my kidneys tested, and they worked better than the average person and still do today. So that was one thing. But I'm sure the long-term antibiotics had an impact on my kidneys. Long-term antibiotics also causes candida, and again, candida is yeast, and cancer loves yeast. My father died of cancer, and we hear a lot of talk about genetics, and if your father did and mother did, and therefore you're going to get cancer. Bullshit, absolutely nonsense. A lot of the time, the actual cancer genetic stuff is less than 5% of cancers are genetic. Find out why the person died of cancer. It's like people say, oh, my dad died of a heart attack, so therefore I'm going to have one. Well, if you want to have one, of course you will do. It's psychologically, you can talk yourself in and out of all sorts of things. My dad died of sarcoma, which is it was bone cancer, in 1976. I was 19 when he died, and he was a cricketer. He was a police inspector, and he played for the police team, and he was number 1 bat, and he would still be there scoring 100 when number 11 was coming in. So it was a relentless bashing to his left thigh. Yeah, left thigh. So in those days there were no helmets and no thigh pads and no protection, so constant bash, 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 bash. And eventually a lump appeared, and it was too late for Dad. Way back in those days they didn't know, what it was all about. And cancer was diagnosed when it was way too late. So just because he had it doesn't mean I was going to get it. My cancer's been entirely different, twice breast cancer and 1 Hodgkin's, which is a blood lymphoma cancer. So always question, look at your own situation, look at your lifestyle, look at your food. In Robert's book, have you got some here?
Yeah.
Books. I encourage you to have a look at the book, because there's all sorts of tips and tricks in there that you can follow yourself. None of it is rocket science. It's all plain simple. Eating healthily, organic if you can do. Lots of use of turmeric, onions, garlic. There's various supplements out there that can help you if you can't get hold of organic foods. Cut out processed, cut out dairy. Gluten-free if you can do, but that's not essential, but it helps the digestive system if you're not eating gluten. Alcohol I encourage in small amounts, because I like my red wine and it's got resveratrol in it, which is good for you. Everything in moderation. Obviously no smoking. Exercise. Just got moved house to Nottingham. I've just moved up from the West Country up to Nottingham, and it seems to be a hotbed of cancer up here. Every which way I turn, there's somebody that knows somebody that's either got it or that's knows somebody that they've lost with cancer. So it's quite bizarre that I've come to an environment, and I'm frequently asked to talk at events, because lots of people don't like talking about cancer, which to me is odd, because I can talk for England, and I said to Robert, you need to get the hook and take me off, because I can talk for days on this subject. There's so many different aspects to it. But at the end of the day, my advice to you is always challenge the information you're given, look at your lifestyle, take control of your lifestyle, and try and encourage those around you to do the same. My family think I'm absolutely bonkers. I don't care, because I know what I do works for me, and not every strategy is going to work for every single person. We're all individual, we're all unique. So whatever it is that is health-wise, in your life, whether it's cancer, heart disease, whatever it is, diabetes, all of the advice in Robert's book will stand you in good stead to help with your health and well-being. So as I say, I could talk for days, but I know there's other people who want to get up. I mean, there's lots of conversations I'm sure you're going to have between you, but if anybody wants to contact me, I'm available on Facebook, and to find me my name's Elaine Godley, Godley, so feel free to friend me, and I've got some tips and sheets and things that I can let you have. So there you go, that's your lot.
Thank you.